Today we're going to be brewing an all-grain batch of our light ale. This recipe that we're going to be showing is applicable for all grain brewing. So we'll start and we'll go through the process. So I've just added 4 quarts of water and we're going to heat it to 156 degrees. So the water's reached 156 degrees. Now we're just going to add the grains. We're just going to gently push them down to make sure the water absorbs into the bag. We're going to check every 10 minutes just to make sure that this is at temperature. We want to hold right around 153 degrees. This process is called mashing, and it's where we're really extracting the sugar from the grains so that we can later create beer with it. Okay, now that our timer is approaching 20 minutes left in the 1 hour mash, we're going to heat 3 quarts of water in a separate pot to 170 degrees. This is going to be used for our next step. So once the water hits 170 degrees, we're just going to cover it and set it aside until we're ready for the next step. Okay, so our timer just went off for 1 hour on the mash. At this point, we're going to raise the temperature to 170 degrees. The purpose here is to actually stop the enzymatic function of the grains that's making the sugars steep into the water. This process is called mashing out. So really, we're just getting the temperature to 170 degrees, turned off the heat. We're going to stir for 3 minutes and then stop. Now what we're going to do is called sparging. It's where we're going to rinse the grains with the water that we previously heated. The first thing we want to do is just make sure that the water's still at 170 degrees. If it's a little under and at 168, that's fine. We just don't want to be too hot or else that will release some tannins and that can affect the quality of the beer. So it looks like we're good. What we're doing here is really just rinsing the grains, making sure that any sugar that was stuck to them falls into the beer. The resulting liquid here is called wort, and that is basically the unfermented beer that we're gonna add hops to in the next step. While this is dripping, I'm just gonna put it over here and we can start the boil. I'm just gonna, okay. So the wort just started boiling. We're going to turn it down to medium so that it doesn't foam over. Every recipe is a little bit different with the hop schedule, so it's important that you refer to your instructions to find out when exactly you should add which hop. So now that there are only 15 minutes left on the boil, I've added the Irish moss, which is a clarifying agent, and it will help make the beer a little bit more clear. All right, so now that there are only 2 minutes left on the timer for the boil, we're gonna go ahead and start making the ice bath. Basically just get as much ice as possible. And if you have ice packs, it's a good idea to throw them in too. Okay, so the timer just went off for the 1 hour completion mark. We're gonna add the last packet of hops. We're just gonna turn off the heat, move the pot over, and now we're just going to stir for 1 minute. This process is called whirlpooling, and essentially what you're doing is just infusing the flavor of all of the hops into the beer, and then once we're done stirring for 1 minute, we're going to add it to the ice bath. Now that the beer is in the water, we're going to use the same spoon we used for the boil, the reason being that it's sanitized from the boil. The beer is very susceptible to contamination from bacteria or anything else, so we just want to be careful not to get anything in. We're just going to stir for about 2 minutes to dissipate some of the heat. So now that we've stirred for 2 minutes, we're going to put a lid onto the pot so that nothing gets into it. Occasionally we can come back and stir the water around the pot and rotate the pot opposite. We just want to make sure we don't open and stir again for the sake of contamination. And while this is cooling, we're just going to make our sanitizer. What we need in this next step is going to be our funnel, a strainer if you have it that's a little finer than the one we used for the sparge, rubber stopper, tubing, and the gallon. I'm also going to reserve a cup of water for the airlock step, which happens in 3 days. So while the beer is cooling, we should check it periodically to make sure that it's getting close to our 75-degree target temperature. You want to make sure that you sanitize the thermometer by putting it into the sanitizer for 1 minute in between each temperature reading. And then after a minute of sanitizing, we're going to stick it in and just see where the beer is. Again, the target temperature is 75 degrees. We're going to take it out of the water and transfer it into the fermenter. If you have another strainer, it's good to use it for this stage just to filter out any hops that are left over in the kettle. So we really want to fill to the 1 gallon mark. There's a little line here that reads 1 gallon. You want to be just above it. If you fall a little short, it's okay to take tap water and fill it up to that line. You just want to make sure that the spout doesn't touch the tip of this fermenter because you can get bacteria in it that way. The next thing we're going to do is just take the beer yeast, pour it in. We're going to take the sanitized rubber stopper, place it in. We're going to take our hands, dip it in the sanitizer just to make sure that if any bacteria is on it, it won't get into the beer. We're just going to lift the fermenter, firmly hold it, and shake it. The objective here is to aerate the wort and break up the yeast particles. Okay, now that we've shaken the fermenter, we're actually going to insert the tubing. The easiest way to do it is to remove the rubber fermenter stopper and just slide the tube in. And then we're just going to firmly put it into place to make sure there's a seal. And now we'll get another cup, fill it with sanitizer, and then we're going to insert the other end of the tube into the sanitizer. Now that we've added the tubing, this is actually the completion of our brew day. Congratulations, you've made a beer. Now we're just going to set this into a closet for 2 weeks. In 3 days, we're going to check back in and just replace this tubing with a blow-off valve. But otherwise, we are all done. Congratulations on making your first beer or on making your second or third or whatever. God. No! Okay, now it's been 3 days. The fermentation has started, but as you can see, it's calmed down a little bit. So we're actually going to swap this valve out with a 3-piece airlock. The first thing you want to do is take the airlock, separate it, and take the reserved cup of sanitizer from brew day and just drop it in so that all of the components get covered. We'll set that aside. We're just going to pull this out. We're going to fill the airlock to the fill line. And then we're going to add the other 2 pieces back to reassemble. Place it in. And then this is going to go back to the closet where it was sitting for another 11 days. And then after a full 2 weeks of fermenting, we're going to move on to the bottling stage.